I'm here if you need me.
Okay, thank you. Mike, if you just want to let me know when I'm good to go, then that's all I need.
You bet. Welcome, friends. I see lots of folks filing in. We'll just give it a minute till everybody gets in the room, and then we will hand off the mic to Mr. Julian.
Thanks, Greg. You just seen your message there.
All right, man, it's 7 o'clock. I will let you have at it.
Awesome. So hello, everyone. My name is Julian Quickstad, and I'm just super grateful for the opportunity to share my story with you today. I'm actually joining in from Toronto tonight, Scarborough, going to school here at York. But I'm from rural Alberta, Clondonald, if you know it. And I'm going to be talking about my experiences with relationship abuse and the deep-rooted trauma that comes with it. And as I was preparing what I wanted to share with you guys tonight, I really had to reflect on the things that I've overcome, where I've come from, and where I am now. 6 years ago, I spent months in a state of pretty much complete dissociation and disconnection. I was getting high on cocaine day and night, and it was quite often that I was staying up for days at a time. And during this time, I burnt through my savings that I had for a down payment. I racked up credit card debt, and as a last resort, I even took out some payday loans. I was months behind on my rent and my bills. And while I had friends growing up and friends in college, I became isolated from them and my family. And all I cared about really was getting high. It was the accumulation of the debt, the isolation, and the relationship abuse that I'm going to be sharing with you tonight that ultimately led to multiple suicide attempts. But I've actually come a long way from where I was 6 years ago. There was a substantial amount of time when I was dissociating from my emotions that I couldn't even tell you the last time that I cried. And during this process of healing, I've really been focusing on connecting with my emotions and really learning how to express them. Early on in my relationship with my wife, I had just got out of a therapy session, and I was telling her about the depressing and gruesome stuff that I discussed in my session, and really how sad I felt about it all. But I remember the look of confusion on her face when I said, "This is awesome. This is the best feeling ever." Because it's really a different experience when you go from having suicidal ideations to just feeling sad and actually feeling something. But now I really do look forward and I appreciate what's in front of me. Today, I have a beautiful wife and I have an amazing 9-month-old son. I've almost completed my psychology degree and I'm planning to go to grad school in Alberta in the next couple of years. And every day, I just have so many things that I look forward to. Jackson, my son, he just started doing this thing where he crawls from across the room and then he pulls at your pant leg until you pick him up. And then he just gives the biggest squeal of excitement. And if you were to ask that person I was before, they'd be shocked at the amount of happiness and the joy that I experience now. So I'm just really thankful that I'm here to experience this version of my life. And I wanted to light a path for the next man to follow out of the darkness. It took me a long time to find my way, and I was really hoping that my story can make that next person's experience less isolating and much less devastating. So this part of my story begins when I graduated college and I got my first job as a power engineer in the oil field. And I was dating this girl who was my first serious girlfriend. And she was part of my plan to become what I thought was a successful man. So you get a good job that pays well, check. Have a long-term partner, check. Never ask for help and hide your problems, check. And I'd always lacked a sense of true connection and a sense of myself and my emotions. And I yearned for someone to fill that emptiness inside of me. And she was that solution. As I initially felt safe with her, I tried to be more vulnerable and pull away from this facade of masculinity that I was holding on to. But unfortunately, I was a bit naive and she used this against me. So the abuse started with small manipulations and subtle derogatory remarks. And I didn't want to be weak, so I lied to myself and I justified that her comments were constructive and that maybe I was just being too sensitive. But in actuality, something shut down in me when she would say these things. How was I supposed to be vulnerable with someone who constantly hurt me? To control my emotions, she would take expensive or sentimental gifts that I gave to her and she would just throw them in the trash. Or another thing she would do is she insisted that we share our phone locations, but conveniently, when I was away at work, she would stop sharing her location with me. And if I questioned her, then she would use a combination of gaslighting and then followed by some love bombing to make me feel that I was paranoid. And eventually I would be apologizing to her because I didn't trust her. It was this way that she regularly made me question my reality and enjoyed highlighting my failures and my weaknesses. And whenever the abuse and manipulation got bad, if I dared stand up to her, she threatened to leave me. And that idea froze me because I finally had that connection. And if she left me, I would have no one. And I also learned that no matter what, I couldn't win. It felt like there was no end in sight. And my reality was so twisted, I'd lost who I was. I believed I was weak. I believed I was a coward. I believed it was my fault that this was happening. And I hated myself for it. So this gaslighting and this love bombing, it eventually grew into some sexual assault. When she felt that I was pulling away from her or to solve a conflict, she would try to use sex as her solution. And I would just let it happen. Because if I would try to stop it, she would either continue trying to force it while verbally bashing my masculinity, or she would just aggressively leave the room, remarking that I don't please her anyways. And I guess you're probably sitting here, at least somewhat thinking that Julian, he's a big enough guy. How could some girl force him to do anything sexual? But the thing is, sometimes while I was trying to stop her, she would frame it to make it seem like I was being physically aggressive with her and abusive to her, while she was just trying to be affectionate with me. And because of this, I was actually genuinely scared that she might call the cops if I stood up for myself. And I had an idea of how that would play out. So more often than not, I would just let it happen. And I learned the easiest way to deal with the situation was to dissociate from my body and my feelings. But the catch was the need for this constant dissociation ruined my sense of self. It worsened my dependence on drugs and alcohol, and it increased my feelings of isolation. So eventually now, the gaslighting, the love bombing, and then the sexual assault actually grew to something more explicit and identifiable. One night, I heard her come home drunk and screaming, and as I walked around the corner towards her, suddenly everything went black. And once I regained consciousness, through blurry eyes, I seen a candle that was sitting on the ground near me on the floor, and I felt a sharp throbbing pain in my temple. So I was disoriented and I was confused, and I had no time to react before she was on top of me, screaming, punching, scratching. But I knew there was one thing I wasn't going to do, and wasn't going to hit her back. I knew that for sure, because I knew what she was trying to do. She was trying to get me to hit her, so then she had evidence that I was the abusive one. But I managed to get her off me and escape out the front door. And I was confused and I was scared for my safety. I called 911 and I waited anxiously for them to arrive, knowing that she might manipulate the situation, that I'd be the one who started it, I'd be the one who's in trouble, and I'd be the abuser. Once they arrived, I did show them the redness and the swelling on my temple from the candle and the scratches and marks on my body. But the thing was, I actually didn't know how to advocate for myself and to properly convey that I was the one being abused. And by the end of the conversation with them, they were convinced that it was a mutual altercation. So they just suggested that I stay somewhere safe for the night. And with limited options due to my isolation, I called my parents and they took me to the hospital first. And then I spent the night at their place. But despite all that happened, she convinced me that her anger and her actions were driven by how deep her love was for me. And the next morning, I actually went straight back home to her. And this is what led me down a journey of pain, suffering, and addiction that ultimately opened up the opportunity for more traumatic experiences. This relationship primed me to be the perfect victim. So I was isolated. I had no self-esteem. I was addicted to meth and cocaine. And then after our relationship ended, I was seeking validation and connection anywhere I could find it. And unfortunately, I found it in a bad place and with the wrong people. And during this time, one of the many things that happened to me, I had a pistol shoved in my face, actually in my mouth, and I was threatened to give them money. And I was also drugged, and I was raped by a group of women. And after this, I started having psychotic breaks from the amount of drugs that I was doing daily to avoid dealing with the emotions of it all. And it was so bad that I was actually left at the hospital entrance by the dealers themselves. And with every traumatic experience, I found myself further away from the man that I grew up expecting to be. So while preparing this, I was trying to find that moment of clarity to share with you, that one identifiable moment where things changed for me that led me to where I am today. But I couldn't find that single moment. I think it was more so the culmination of a bunch of smaller moments that I almost just got lucky. And during one of my lowest moments, I craved support, but feeling that I had no one to turn to, I made the decision to try rehab. And I wasn't convinced that rehab would necessarily work, but while there, I actually was exposed to other men who were sharing vulnerable stories with me. And this helped take away the shame that I was feeling about my past. And it made me feel that maybe I could still become a man that I was proud of. This is really the first step to leaving behind my feelings of victimhood and hopelessness. And seeing someone at an empowered point in their journey, I finally felt capable of defining who I was and who I could be. And I had a new sense of direction and purpose. So I'm sure you've heard the buzz phrase, the solution to addiction is connection. I built a supportive community that expanded my perception of what it meant to be a man. But beyond this, I really needed to connect with myself. And now I had a sense of direction and a community that believed in this version of myself. I was able to change my attitude towards abuse, trauma, and addiction that was much less self-critical. So I know it's difficult to acknowledge that you've lost yourself, and it's normal to avoid your self-awareness and the pain that you've experienced. But the more you avoid the issues, the pain, and the emotions, the less you understand yourself. And I learned that the connection and the validation I sought from others needed to be found within myself first. And as I built this relationship with myself, I became comfortable with those emotions and how to deal with them. So as I mentioned before, there was a bunch of small moments that contributed to my success and my healing. And while in rehab, I met some interesting people, to say the least. But one of them said something to me that I still think about today. He asked me the simplest question: what do you enjoy? So at the time I contemplated the idea, and it wasn't hard for me to answer. I like sports, I like card games, I like board games, I like going to the gym, video games. And I had this long list of things that came to mind. But then he asked me, okay, so when was the last time you actually did any of those things? And I thought about it for a second, and I realized I probably hadn't played sports in numerous years. I didn't play with cards or any board games because I thought that dealing with your demons and trying to heal yourself meant focusing on why these bad things happen to me. But now I understand it. It makes sense why I wasn't happy. I forgot that connecting with yourself also means finding what brings you joy, what excites you, and what you look forward to. And I guess that I learned is that your journey of healing doesn't need to be focused on the bad, as easy as it is to be. But we need to take some time to actually do the things that make you happy. And so I'm not sharing my story to act like my life is picture perfect now. I'm in therapy, I'm on medication, I'm constantly working on being a better man, better husband, and a better father. And I recognize the discomfort and the shame that people feel about male abuse perpetrated by their female partners. And I haven't always been this comfortable sharing my story, but I do this in hope that it might encourage someone else to speak out or leave an abusive situation. As well, this is not just intended for men experiencing relationship abuse, but to highlight the fact that this is a real issue and that it might be affecting people that you know, but they aren't saying anything. And the reality is that most men that I've seen experience abuse in relationships, they conceal it. But it might be uncomfortable. But if you're concerned with someone in your life, please try to connect with them. Create a safe space for them to share what's going on. And sometimes it's not even about having that conversation right away. But if you've approached them, they might remember that later and feel comfortable talking to you. And due to the stigma that still exists in this area, it takes a lot of courage for a man to talk about this. And I hope we can all contribute to destigmatizing this issue and build a culture where men no longer need to conceal their abuse, but we can find strength in their vulnerabilities. Thank you so much for listening to that.
Julian, thank you, brother. I love that we've created a space where we can have these kinds of conversations, because where else do we have these conversations? Thank you so much for having the courage to show up and be vulnerable and share. Does anybody have any questions before we kick you out of here? Are you seeing all the chat, Julian?
I'm just going to look there right now. Looking back to what do you think you need during that time in order to ask for help? Well, I think if I was, say, involved in a group like this and around people that are men specifically, that were capable of sharing their own feelings, it would kind of set an example that I would be able to do it. Because I guess there's just that shame that because you're a man, that these things shouldn't happen to you and that you're weak because they do. But there's more than just physical abuse. Like there's mental abuse, and it is often, in my opinion, harder than the physical abuse. So yeah.
Harold's wondering how long how long a period of time did that occur over?
I was with her for about 4 years, and I would say the abuse was not good abuse, but it was mostly just like the gaslighting kind of thing and love bombing, just manipulation for quite a while. And then the last 2 years of our relationship is when things started getting worse. But again, I just felt so tied in, and I'd been with this person for so long that it was almost like I was like trauma bonded with them.
Somebody's asking, what do you wish people knew about these kinds of experiences?
And I don't judge anyone for that was around me when this happened, but I felt it impossible to talk about this, and I don't know how clear it was to other people around me, but I wish that they would have been able to come up to me and like, look, she's not a nice person.
Right.
You need to get out of that. Because in my mind, I was like, everything was all twisted, and I thought that I needed her and all this stuff. So
All right, friends, I feel like we could, again, this is a conversation we just don't have every day. And so I feel like this is a conversation that we could have for hours, but we got 5 minutes until our next session with Mr. Greg Kettner. So yeah, read those chat comments, Julian. Just a lot of love and pride showing up for you.
yeah, thank you everyone for the support, and I'm definitely open to have that conversation.
How can people find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn as well, or you can just send me an email. I can put that in the chat there.
Yeah. Okay. Somebody's asking, I'm gonna have to cut this short. So yeah, if you want to just julian.quickstad@gmail.com. So if you grab his email from the chat, you can send him a note directly and share. And we'll, you know what, we'll have more conversations about this. Obviously, there's a lot of Harold, you nailed it. There's a lot of men that need to hear this. All right, friends, I am going to kick you out of here, and I will see you over in our next session. Julian, once again, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to much more work together down the road.
Yeah, I'm excited for it.
All right, brother. Take care.